So if the current proposition is too extreme, do you have a theory with regards to how we do expand equality without going to such extremes?
I think we're doing a good job of that right now. I mean, how fast do you think how fast could you even hope for things to change? Look at what's happened to the situation with women since 1970. That's changed so fast that people can't even keep up. It's not obvious, by the way, either, that it's been particularly good for women. Now, you could make a case that it was good for society, maybe. It's a tough one, because the birth rate has plummeted. And so, maybe you don't care about that. Maybe you think there's too many people on the planet already, whatever. But, it isn't that easy to figure out when something is working properly. One of the things we seem to know, is that to the degree that rights are extended to women, economic prosperity follows. So you can see worldwide that the societies that have extended the rights to women most extensively are also the societies that seem to be flourishing economically. And there does seem to be a causal relationship. But women have paid a big price for that. So what's happened in part is, first of all, for say, women who are middle class or lower, their lives have essentially fallen apart because marriage is now restricted to the rich, which is also something to think about for those of you who think marriage is an oppressive patriarchal institution. It's like, okay, then why are only the rich people getting married? They're oppressing themselves? I don't think so. And so the women who are in the lower socioeconomic stratas are suffering madly, and so are their children. And they have terrible jobs most of the time, like jobs in retail where, they're called in every day for the next day. They don't have a schedule that's set out ahead of them. They get paid very badly. They've got kids to take care of. And so they have no free time. It makes them really easy targets for useless predatory males. And it's really hard on the kids. And that's like 40% of the female population, something like that. You guys, well, I don't know about all of you, but you're in university. You're part of the privileged cognitive elite, So these sorts of things don't really touch you the same way they touch other people. And so women are much unhappier if you look at national polls than they were, say, in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And I think that's partly because freedom and happiness, those are not the same thing. They're not even close. And I see young women all the time struggling to figure out what to do with their lives because they have no idea how to have a job/career and a family. So, and there's no answer to that. It's a really difficult problem. And there's all sorts of ideas. Like, I did a lot of consulting for law firms for a long time, about a decade, and I had a lot of clients who were extremely high-functioning female lawyers, younger ones, trying to figure out how to balance their career with their desire to have a life. And, you hear all the time about women being denied access to positions of power, and that's the consequence of prejudice and oppression. It's like, yeah, everything is caused by the same thing first. Right, you have got one causal principle. Wonderful. Now you're a philosopher. You can figure out everything with it. It's like the law firms cannot keep their women in their 30s. They cannot keep them, the big law firms. They all leave. Why? Because the women hit 30, they're brilliant, conscientious, intelligent. They were deadly in high school, deadly in university. They nailed law school. They whipped through their articling. They made partner by the time they were 30. It was like they're in a rocket to the top position. What do they find when they get there? 80-hour work weeks, right? Because that's one of the things you want to think about. You think that the people who run things are sitting at home smoking big cigars and like telling their minions what to do. It's like that's like the 1920s millionaire that's on the cover of the Monopoly game. That's no sociological analysis. I know lots of people like that, and they work all the time, from the second they wake up till the second they go to sleep. And they don't just casually work. Because I know some of you go to the library for 6 hours and you say, well, I studied in the library for 6 hours. Like, no, you didn't. You studied for half an hour. You had coffee and you looked through Facebook and, you went home and you said, well, I studied for 6 hours and you're happy about it. But bloody well you didn't. Partly because you can't. I can only read for about 3.5 hours till I'm done. And I'm pretty good at it. So these people who are running things, there's corrupt people, obviously, but the vast majority of them, first, are self-made, and second, they're so bloody efficient and smart, you cannot believe it. And they work 80 hours a week. And most of them happen to be men. And why is that? Because there are a small number of insane men who will do nothing but work 80 hours a week. And no matter where you put them, if you put them in the middle of a forest with an axe, all they would do is run around chopping down trees. So the issue isn't why aren't there more women in positions of power? It's why are there any men insane enough ever to occupy those positions? Because we also know, and the data on this is very clear, what's the relationship between money and well-being? Once you have enough money to keep the bill collectors from your door, so once you have enough money to stave off misery, which is sort of lower middle class, something like that in our society, maybe a little lower than that, extra money does not help you. It does not improve your life. So why bother with it? Well, that's what the women in the law firms think. It's like most of them, by the time they're in their 30s, are married. Almost all of them are married to men who make as much money or more than they do, because that's what women go for cross-culturally. 4 to 5 years older, equal or higher in the socioeconomic status. So their husbands already make $350,000 a year. It's like they think, well, I don't need much more money. The men use money to keep track of the competition, by the way, because all the male lawyers that I talk to are usually real hard-ass guys, really low in agreeableness, really high in conscientiousness, like conservative types, low in openness as well. And they want to win. And the reason they care about their damn bonus at the end of the year isn't even so much because of the money, it's because they got a much bigger bonus than the other son of a bitch sitting beside them, and they're happy about that. So there's a real brass knuckles competition that drives these sorts of things. But we get things backwards so often in psychology and in sociology. It's not why there aren't more women in positions of power. It's why do any men want those positions? You just have no idea the amount of responsibility that comes along with that. You just imagine for a minute trying to run $1 billion corporation. You can't even bloody well balance your checkbook, and there's dust bunnies underneath your bed. How in the world would you ever run $1 billion corporation? Those things are complicated. And you have enemies, and they're trying to take you out all the time. You look at Apple and Samsung, man, they're just torturing each other in the courts nonstop. If you're running a big corporation, you'll be handling 200 or 300 lawsuits at a time. And that's just nothing compared to the complexity of what you actually have to do. Stay on top of the technology, constantly interact with your large customers, travel all the time because you have to maintain the relationships. You have to regulate the politics inside the business. Believe me, it's no picnic. And you think, well, they get a lot of money. It's like, what makes you think that's such a good thing? If you're half crazy and you have a lot of money, you're going to be crazy a lot faster, I can tell you that, because it frees you from all sorts of constraints. We know the data on lottery winners. They're no happier a year later, and some of them are done, especially if they had like a bit of a cocaine problem to begin with, because, being broke stops you from dying if you're a cocaine addict. You get enough money, and away you go. And you think to yourself, you've got all sorts of bad habits and weirdnesses. If somebody dumped an infinite amount of money on you, what makes you think you wouldn't unravel completely? It's highly probable. So, anyway, so back to these women. What they do when they're 30 is they look around and they've hit partners, so they've hit the pinnacle of their profession. They think, what the hell am I doing this for? Why would anyone in their right mind want to be woken up at 3 a.m. Sunday by their irate Japanese client who wants them to work for the next 5 hours non-stop to fix this damn problem, which is going to cost them $100 million right now? Or we'll find someone else to pay $750 an hour to fix it right now. And you think, well, that's, a masculine form of value, because that's one of the criticisms. If the law firms just adopted a more feminine structure of value, it's like, what kind of bullshit is that? The reason that you get up at 3 a.m. on Sunday to talk to your Japanese client who's freaking out about their contract is because if you don't jump the hell up and do it right now, there's some starving associate who's unbelievably ambitious in New York who will pick up the pieces in 0.2 of a second, and they're smart and aggressive, and they'll take you out. So it has nothing to do with masculine structures of value. It's all the foolish ideas. And it's not just law where this happens. We know, for example, that female doctors work far fewer hours too. So the more female doctors you have, the more doctors you have to have. And I'm not complaining about women's priorities. I'm not saying the women are wrong. Not at all. It's like the older I get, the more I understand that marriage and family are of primary importance. And the more I see women in particular, they hit 35 or 40 and they're not married and they don't have kids and they are not happy. Because what the hell are you going to do from the time you're 40 till the time you're 80? You got no family? You got no relationships? What are you going to do? Go run your company. Yeah, well, if you're 1 in 1,000, that'll satisfy you. So you bloody well better make sure you're that 1 in 1,000, and you're probably not, because those people are rare. So
then, because Dr. Peterson, one of the natural responses to what you just said would be, okay, well, the priorities are, it's a rigged game because only women are the ones who are able to procreate. So what do we answer to that?
Of course it's a rigged game. Obviously it's a rigged game. Women have complicated lives and the pill has made them more complicated. Well, that's not, I wouldn't say that exactly because, 100 years, in 1895, the average person in the Western world lived on $1 a day in today's money. Okay, so those people worked so hard and slaved away to such a degree that you can't even imagine it, and all their kids died, right? So the death rate among kids below 5 was beyond comprehension. And so, women had a terrible time of it. And, well, so did men. They got to be coal miners and soldiers. Because that wasn't exactly entertaining. So life was very, 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 very hard before we got rich. And we're rich. Even those of you who are in this class who think you're poor, it's like, no, you're not. You're in the top 0.1% by historical standards, and probably there by current world standards as well. Of course, you can just compare yourself to the few people who are richer than you and feel sorry for yourself. But that's pretty pathetic in my estimation. So it's certainly historically uninformed. So yeah, women have it rough, obviously. Now, there's other things to consider. You do live 8 years longer. So that's not trivial. Testosterone kills men. That's basically why men die earlier. And men are much more likely to be killed in dangerous jobs. They do almost all the dangerous jobs. They do almost all the outside work. And there's lots of reasons that men get paid more than women that have nothing to do with prejudice. It's because they take awful, horrible jobs, like working in the oil rigs in northern Alberta when it's bloody 40 below, and come out of that after 5 years with 2 or 3 fingers missing and all warped up. Because you really want to wrestle pipe when it's 40 below and it's filthy with a bunch of ordinary men who are hungover beyond belief. It's like, that's not very entertaining. So yeah, each gender, each sex has its own unfairness to deal with, but to think of that as a consequence of the social structure, it's like, come on, really? What about nature itself? And this is something that seems to be completely invisible on the left side of the political spectrum. It's like, of course you're bloody oppressed and your life is full of suffering, obviously. But to think about that as a direct consequence of unjust social structures is just moronic. It's like, that's part of the reason, a small part, but look where you're sitting, people. It's pretty warm in here. And you're so privileged you can come here on Saturday morning and listen to an intellectual lecture. It's like, you should be happy about that, because by historical standards, you should be out lifting rocks in your skeletal form, about 5'3" with no teeth. So
fighting with cougars.
Yeah. Cougars and lions, yeah, exactly. So, there's no gratitude. That's the thing. There's no gratitude for what our society is capable of doing.